My 10-year-old daughter played piano for her grandparents. They laughed and humiliated her. So I kicked them out. But they called child services with false reports. Now they're facing a restraining order they never saw coming. I'm 37 years old, work in project management for a construction company, and I'm a single dad to Ella, my 10-year-old daughter. What happened 2 weeks ago basically destroyed what little was left of my relationship with my parents and my sister. And honestly, I need to tell this story because I'm still processing everything. The thing is, I always knew my parents were difficult, you know, the type of people who always have something negative to say. But I never thought they'd go so far as to hurt my daughter. I guess I should start from the beginning so it makes sense. I grew up in a house where nothing you did was ever good enough. My father, Kenneth, is one of those men who thinks he knows everything about everything, like the expert on any topic that comes up in conversation. And my mother, Deborah, has that passive-aggressive way of commenting on things that makes you feel like garbage without her technically saying anything wrong. My sister, Catherine, 3 years younger than me, was always the golden child. I mean, she could do anything, and she was perfect in our parents' eyes, while I was always the one who did everything wrong. When I decided to study administration instead of engineering like my father wanted, it was months of drama. When I married Courtney, my ex, my mother spent the whole wedding commenting about how the dress was too revealing or the food was too salty. That's just how they are, basically. I divorced Courtney 4 years ago. It was amicable, seriously. We just realized we wanted different things from life and decided to separate before things got ugly. We share 50-50 custody of Ella, 1 week with me and 1 week with her, and we work pretty well together as co-parents. Courtney is a good mom. I've never had complaints about that. After the divorce, I decided to limit contact with my parents because, honestly, I didn't need that kind of negative energy in my life while I was trying to rebuild. I'd see them maybe once every 2 or 3 months, at quick dinners or obligatory family events, and kept conversations superficial. Catherine, on her part, talked to them almost every day, and she'd always send me messages like, "You should call mom and dad more. They feel bad." And I'm like, well, maybe if they weren't so critical about everything, I'd call them more often. About 3 months ago, Ella told me she wanted to learn to play piano. She'd heard a friend from school play something at a gathering and thought it was beautiful. I was super excited. I mean, I love when kids show genuine interest in something creative, so I found a piano teacher near the house and signed her up for weekly lessons. The teacher, a very patient older man named Mr. Morrison, taught her the basics every Wednesday afternoon. She practiced almost every day after doing her homework, like half an hour, sitting at the digital keyboard. I bought her because a real piano is super expensive and I didn't know if she'd actually like it, long term, you know what I mean? I was so proud watching her work at it, concentrating on the notes, getting frustrated when she made mistakes, but trying again. That's what you want to see as a parent, right? Your kid challenging themselves and persevering. After 2 weeks of lessons, Ella learned a super simple piece, basically a melody of about 30 seconds, that sounded pretty decent if you didn't mind the occasional pauses where she had to remember which key came next. She was so excited to show it to me that she played it like 5 times in a row that night. I applauded every time because, literally, what else are you going to do? Your 10-year-old daughter is proud of something she accomplished. You support her, period. She asked me if she could play it for her grandparents the next time they came over, and I, without thinking much about it, said sure, that they'd surely love to hear it. God, I wish I'd thought that answer through better. It turns out Catherine had been pressuring me to invite my parents to dinner because, according to her, I was distancing myself too much from the family, and they felt rejected. I really didn't want to, but I also didn't want to cause more drama, so I gave in and invited them to dinner on a Friday. I told them to come around 7, that I'd make pasta, the only thing I cook decently, honestly, and that it would be something chill. They arrived on time, which I should have taken as a warning sign because my parents are never punctual unless they have some kind of agenda. Kenneth walked in with that attitude of his, looking around my living room like he was evaluating a property to buy, making comments about how I should change the furniture arrangement or paint the walls a different color. Deborah went straight to the kitchen and started suggesting I add more salt to the sauce or that the pasta was overcooked. Those kinds of things that are technically help but feel like criticism. Dinner was tense but manageable. We talked about superficial things, work, weather, local news, nothing deep. Ella was quiet during most of dinner, which isn't unusual for her when there are people around. She's a bit shy in general. But after we finished eating, she lit up and asked me if she could play her piano piece for her grandparents. I said yes, super proud, and she ran to the living room where we had the keyboard. I cleared the table a bit while she got ready, excited because I thought my parents would finally see something positive, something they could celebrate without criticizing. Ella sat on the bench, adjusted the sheet music stand, even though she already knew the piece by heart, and started playing. And look, I'm not going to lie, it wasn't perfect. There were a couple wrong notes, a long pause in the middle where she clearly forgot what came next, and the tempo was a bit inconsistent. But she was 10 years old and had been taking lessons for 2 weeks. 2 weeks. When she finished, she turned toward us with that huge smile, waiting for approval, and I immediately started clapping, telling her she'd done amazing and that I was so proud of her. And then Kenneth laughed. It wasn't a kind laugh or one of amusement. It was that mocking, condescending laugh that basically says, "This is ridiculous." Deborah joined in, covering her mouth like she was being polite, but clearly laughing too. Kenneth said something like, "Well, that was interesting," with that sarcastic tone he uses when he wants to make it clear something is bad without saying it directly. Deborah added, "Maybe she needs more practice, dear, many more lessons before playing for people," and they laughed again. I froze for a second because I couldn't believe what was happening. I looked at Ella and saw how her smile completely faded, how her eyes filled with tears, and something inside me just exploded. I stood up so fast I almost knocked over the chair and told them, "You know what? Get out of my house right now." Kenneth looked to me like I was crazy and said something like, "Oh, come on. We were just joking, relax." And I'm like, "No, you're not joking. You're being cruel to a 10-year-old girl who's proud of her progress." Deborah tried that passive-aggressive thing of, "Oh, don't be so sensitive. We were just being honest." She has to learn to accept real criticism, and I literally felt my blood boiling. I told them, constructive would be saying, "Well done, keep practicing," not laughing at her. "You need to leave. Now." Kenneth got all indignant, raising his voice about how I was being disrespectful and that they were my parents and deserved respect. And I yelled back, that respect is something you earn, and they'd just lost any trace of what I still had for them. I practically pushed them toward the door, ignoring Deborah's protests about how I was overreacting and ruining the family. I closed the door behind them and stood there, shaking with rage, trying to process what had just happened. I heard Ella crying in the living room and went to her, sat down next to her and hugged her while she sobbed against my shoulder. She said, "Did I do that badly, Dad?" And I told her, "No, honey, you didn't do badly at all. You did amazing. Grandma and Grandpa were very cruel and they were completely wrong. I'm so proud of you." We spent like an hour there, me trying to comfort her, explaining that some people are just mean and that it has nothing to do with her or her talent. Eventually, she calmed down a bit, and I took her to her room, read her a story before bed, and stayed with her until she fell asleep. But that image of her little face when they laughed, that's never going to leave me, literally never. That night, after Ella was asleep, I sent my parents a text. Normally, I'm not the type to send long texts, but I needed it in writing. I told them something like, "What you did tonight was unacceptable. Mocking a child who's learning something new and is proud of her progress is cruel, period. I'm not going to allow you to hurt my daughter that way. Until you can genuinely apologize to Ella and show that you understand why it was wrong, you're not welcome in my house or in our lives." They didn't respond that night, which honestly was a relief because I didn't have energy to fight more. For the next day, around 10 in the morning, I got a call from Catherine. She didn't even let me speak before starting to yell about how I had kicked our parents out of my house and made them feel horrible. I tried to explain what happened, what they did to Ella, but she didn't want to listen. She kept saying things like, "They were just being honest. You can't protect Ella from all criticism in life. She has to learn to handle that things aren't always going to turn out perfect." I told her, "Catherine, there's a difference between constructive criticism and cruelty, and what they did was pure cruelty." They laughed at a 10-year-old girl. She responded with that whole, "You've always been too dramatic, you always exaggerate everything. Mom and Dad aren't perfect, but they're not monsters like you paint them," and that's when I completely lost my patience. I told her, "You know what, Catherine? Maybe it's easy for you to defend them because they never treated you the way they treated me. You were the perfect one, the one who never did anything wrong, while I couldn't even breathe without receiving criticism. And now they're doing the same thing to my daughter, and I'm not going to allow it. If you want to keep being their golden child and let them treat you like their pet, go ahead, but don't ask me to expose Ella to that." She was silent for a second and then said something really low, like, "Maybe Courtney should have more custody time if you can't handle Ella appropriately." And that was the straw that broke the camel's back. I told her to go to hell and hung up. I blocked her number immediately because I knew if we kept talking I was going to say things I couldn't take back. I thought that would be the end of it. I mean, everyone upset, but eventually they'd calm down and we'd settle into a mutual no contact. But no, of course it wasn't like that. Over the next few days, I started receiving messages from uncles, cousins, even from a neighbor of my parents who somehow had my number, all telling me I was being unreasonable, that I should apologize to my parents, that family is sacred, and you can't just cut off your parents over something so small. Something small. As if traumatizing my daughter was something small. I blocked everyone, literally everyone, because I wasn't going to justify my decision to people who had clearly only heard my parents' and Catherine's version. A week after the incident, I received an email from Deborah. I didn't have her blocked on email because, honestly, I didn't think she'd use it. The email was long, like 3 paragraphs, and basically said that she and Kenneth were worried about Ella and that maybe it would be better if they helped more with her upbringing because I clearly wasn't handling single parenting well. She suggested that Ella could spend more time with them, that they could teach her discipline and structure, and that I was being too soft with her by not allowing her to face real criticism. I read that email like 3 times because I couldn't believe the audacity. After what they did, they wanted more access to my daughter? To be able to keep hurting her? I didn't respond to them because I didn't trust myself to write something coherent without insults. On Wednesday of that week, I was working from home. I have a flexible schedule that allows me to be there when Ella gets out of school. When I heard someone knocking hard on the door, I opened it, and there was Kenneth, with his arms crossed and that expression of contained fury he used to have when I was a kid and had done something he considered unacceptable. He told me, "We need to talk. Let me in." And I'm like, "No, you're not coming into my house." He tried to push me a little, not violently but physically. And I stood firm at the door, telling him to leave, or I'd call the police. He accused me of being a brat, of poisoning my daughter against her family, of ruining family relationships because of my ego and excessive sensitivity. I told him that he had ruined the relationship when he decided to mock an innocent girl, and that I had nothing more to talk to him about. Kenneth kept trying to get in, saying things like, "I'm your father, you have to listen to me." And I, honestly shaking a bit because part of me still has that childhood fear of him, took out my phone and literally dialed the emergency number in front of him. I said, "I have someone on my property who refuses to leave. I need you to send someone," and gave my address. Kenneth went white and backed up, muttering something about how I was crazy and that I was going to regret this, but he finally went to his car and left. I canceled the emergency call, explaining that the person had left. But the operator suggested I consider a restraining order if the situation continued, which honestly I hadn't considered until that moment but started to sound like a good idea. You'd think that would be enough, right? But wait, because it gets worse. 2 days later, on a Friday afternoon, there was a knock on the door, and it was a CPS worker, Child Protective Services. My heart literally stopped. She told me they'd received an anonymous report about concerns of neglect and emotional abuse toward a minor at my address, and that she needed to do an investigative visit. I said yes, obviously, because refusing would only make me look guilty, but I was in absolute shock. Neglect? Emotional abuse? What were they talking about? The worker, a serious but not hostile woman named something like Jennifer or Jessica, I don't remember exactly because I was so nervous, came in and started asking me questions about my routine with Ella. School, feeding, supervision. She inspected the house, saw the full refrigerator, Ella's room clean and organized with her toys and books, asked about medical care and school records. I cooperated completely, showing her everything she asked for, explaining my flexible work schedule and our shared custody arrangement with Courtney. Then she asked to speak with Ella alone, and although it killed me not to be able to be there, I let her take Ella to her room and close the door. It was like 20 minutes that felt like hours. When they came out, Ella looked confused but not distressed, and the worker told me she needed to do some additional verifications, but that she didn't see any immediate signs of concern. She asked me if I had any idea who might have made the report, and I, sighing because I already knew the answer, told her the whole story. My parents, the piano incident, my sister threatening to suggest that Courtney should have more custody, the fact that I'd cut contact with all of them. The worker wrote everything down without expression, professional to the max, and told me she'd contact me in the next few days with the results of the investigation. After she left, I sat down with Ella and asked her what she'd talked about with the lady. She told me. She asked if she felt safe at home, if Daddy hurt her or left her alone, if she had enough food, and if she went to school every day. She told her yes, she felt safe, that I was a good dad, that there was always food, and that she liked her school. She also asked her about her grandparents, and Ella told her about the piano and how they'd laughed at her and made her feel bad. I felt relieved that Ella had been honest, but also furious that she'd been put in that position to begin with. That night, I called Courtney and told her everything. She already knew something because Catherine had contacted her, suggesting that I was unstable and that maybe she should consider asking for full custody, but Courtney, bless her, told me I knew I was a good father, and that she had no concerns about how I cared for Ella. She asked if I needed help with anything, and I told her no, that I just wanted her to know what was happening in case my parents or Catherine tried to involve her more. Courtney assured me that if anyone contacted her, she'd make it clear there were no problems and that our custody arrangement worked perfectly. That conversation calmed me down a bit, because at least I knew Courtney was on my side in this. A week later, the CPS worker called to inform me that the investigation was closed. They hadn't found evidence of neglect or abuse. Ella was clearly well cared for and happy. The school reported she was a regular student without attendance or behavior problems, and Courtney had confirmed that I was a responsible and committed father. She told me the case was officially closed and there would be no follow-up. She also mentioned, something she technically shouldn't have said but did, that in her experience anonymous reports from upset family members were unfortunately common and that she was sorry we'd had to go through the process. I thanked her and hung up, feeling a mixture of relief and absolute rage. That's when I decided I needed to take legal action. I contacted a lawyer who specializes in family law and explained the whole situation to him. The original incident, the harassment from my family, Kenneth showing up at my house, the false CPS report. The lawyer, a guy in his 50s named Robert something, told me I had a solid case for a restraining order against Kenneth and Deborah, and that I could also send a cease and desist letter to Catherine for the false CPS report and threats to interfere with my custody. He explained the process, the costs, not cheap but worth every penny, and told me to also document everything, all messages, emails, call records, everything. We started the process last week. The lawyer sent the cease and desist letter to Catherine certified, basically telling her that if she continued with any type of harassment, interference with my custody, or false reports to authorities, she'd face legal consequences that could include lawsuits for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We also filed the application for the restraining order against Kenneth and Deborah, citing the incident at my door, the continued harassment, and the pattern of harmful behavior toward Ella. We have a hearing scheduled in 2 weeks where a judge will decide whether to grant a temporary order that could eventually become permanent. Since we sent those letters, everything went quiet. Catherine hasn't tried to contact me, my parents haven't either, and the rest of the extended family seems to have gotten the message that this is serious. Part of me feels guilt, that feeling of, did I really have to go this far? But then I think about Ella's face when they laughed at her, how she trembled when the CPS worker interviewed her, without really understanding why. And I know I made the right decision. My job as a parent is to protect her, even if that means cutting my own family out of our lives. Ella keeps going to her piano lessons. After all the drama, Mr. Morrison called me worried because he'd noticed that Ella seemed less enthusiastic in her lessons. I told him a summarized version of what happened, without going into all the legal details, and he was incredibly understanding. He told me he was going to work extra to rebuild Ella's confidence in her music and not to worry about payments if she needed to miss some lessons due to stress. I haven't had to miss any, but the gesture really got to me. Ella is slowly improving, her confidence is gradually coming back, and last week she played a new piece for me without me asking. I almost started crying from pride and relief. Courtney has been an incredible support during all this too. Even though we're not together romantically anymore, it shows I chose a good person to be my daughter's mother. She's offered to change custody schedules temporarily if I need space to handle all the legal stuff, but I told her no, that Ella needs her normal routine and her time with both of us. The last thing I want is for this to disrupt her life more than it already has. Last night, while I was reading to Ella before bed, she asked me if Grandma and Grandpa were ever going to come back. I told her the truth, that I didn't know, that maybe someday if they could understand what they did wrong and genuinely apologize, but that for now it wasn't going to happen. She thought for a moment and then said, "It's okay, Daddy. I'm fine here with you and Mommy anyway. I don't need them if they're going to be mean." And that's enough for now, I guess.